Great. Well, welcome everybody to our kickoff of our 2023 Learning Community Sessions. We are excited to be continuing these and to see them gaining in popularity. I would invite all of you to send us topics that you'd like to see or share in the future. And you can even throw those in the chat if you want. We're going to start off by doing a quick, we would do a quick round of introductions if we only had like 10 or 15 people, because that's that's doable, but we just have too many today. So the way we'll do that is actually ask you to put into the chat your name and how you're connected to mobility and access in Maine. And that might be as a volunteer, it might be your own lived experience, your professional role, all of the above. So we want to know that this is an opportunity for folks to meet each other and network as much as it is to gain knowledge. So today we're focusing on volunteer driver programs and a collaborative effort to strengthen and expand programs. And I'm very excited to see the amount of energy this has generated. And I know folks are here thinking about a lot of different audiences who need rides. And so I think it'll be a really great presentation and then conversation. Couple pieces about Moving Maine for those who maybe are not as familiar. We are focused first and foremost on building a relationship infrastructure of people across the state who care about better mobility, with a focus on people focusing on improving transportation access for people who have barriers. And we know that that includes older adults, people with disabilities, people with limited English proficiency, people with low incomes, and sadly the list goes on because we know that many people are affected by transportation barriers. The great news is that together we can make some really powerful change happen. And so that's our second focus, is really informing policy change. And I've been really working furiously for the past couple of months on and joined by many of you on how we can impact policy change for this legislative session, and also some of the work that goes on that's not legislative in nature. We'll be talking more about that next month at our learning community session, and we'll also be sharing some updates on that in a newsletter. We focus on improving coordination, and so I think, many of you don't need to have it explained to you what coordination is. But in a nutshell, looking at who are all the people who need to work together to make transportation solutions a reality, and then getting really clear on how we support that coordination and how it's structured. It doesn't happen by itself. It needs people whose job it is to coordinate. And then finally, I think, we really care about telling stories of how mobility access benefits people and provides a good quality of life, and where it has negative impacts. And so those stories are really important. And you're going to hear more from us soon about how we want to continue to collect those stories, especially going into the legislative session and being able to share stories with decision makers. So our goal for these sessions is to share expertise, and we love sharing what's happening right here in Maine. And sometimes we attract people from other places to sit in and hear about it. And then we also invite people from other parts of the country to share. We really want to move people to action on transportation solutions. So, I love hearing the stories of how people took what they learned or who they met at a session and then went on to do something. And so, we want you to think about that today. What are you going to do next out of this? And then finally building relationships. And, you know, as people who know me and have heard me talk about this, I think sometimes building relationships can be seen as, you know, the soft stuff, but when in fact, I think we build relationships and then we're ready to take action when resources show up. So, you know, you meet the people and you know exactly who to call when you have an opportunity. And so that's a huge part of what we're trying to do here. Today, I'm going to pivot into our presentation. Today we have two folks who've been working on transportation solutions in Maine for a long time and have so much insight to share. So we're really excited to hear from Joe Cooper from the Maine Council on Aging and Mary Beth Paquette from the UMaine Center on Aging. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about them before we get started. Joe Cooper is from Mount Desert Island, where she grew up, and she has a BA from Wellesley and a master's from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Medieval Scottish history. It'd be interesting to find out how that shows up in your work, Joe. And she, after working in the family textile business, became a hospice worker, which led her to a position as a volunteer coordinator for a small volunteer transportation program. And that inspired her to found a nonprofit that I know many of you are familiar with, that assists older adults in Hancock County, Friends in Action. And she grew that organization to have a huge impact in helping older adults and people with disabilities. She retired last year, but it's always funny when people say they retired, because she is still working on a lot of stuff. And she's currently working as a consultant with Maine Council on Aging. So Mary Beth Paquette is in her third year as a fellow with UMaine AARP Age Friendly Communities. And she's currently working with the town of Windham. She's worked with nonprofits throughout her career, and most recently as the executive director of Neighbors Driving Neighbors, a rural transportation program in central Maine. And she started working on creating a list of all the volunteer programs across Maine, volunteer transportation programs, and a how-to manual. And Joe and Mary Beth realized that they had complementary work and projects, and came together, and we're going to hear about where that's taken them. And so I think I'm handing it first to you, Joe, to get us started, unless you guys decided you wanted Mary Beth to go first.
I'm going first.
Okay, Mary Beth, throw me a curveball, but that's okay, no worries. So
It's
you
okay.
have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Give me just 1 sec to do that. Try it again. It's a coming. It's a coming. So anyways, while I'm doing this, so I live in Monmouth, which is near Augusta, Lewiston, and as was shared, I am working with UMaine Office on Aging and AARP on a project that is, here I am. Now I can see my stuff. 1 more sec. Here we go. I think. Oh, for goodness sakes, I'm just going to talk to you, okay? Because that's not working for me. I'm Xing out, taking up a lot of your time, I see. Okay, so The project that I'm working on, and did cross with Joe's and probably will cross again with Joe's and other projects that are going on around the state is, a transportation list and a transportation, how-to manual. So, the list has come together and, the Council on Aging was really helpful in that they already had a great deal of the list, compiled. But what we did, myself and, Barbara Wentworth, who is the other fellow working on this project. The project is funded by, the Maine Community Foundation and supported by the UMaine Office on Aging. The project is to put together a list of volunteer transportation programs and to write a how-to manual. So the list, as I said, is together, but continues to change because new, smaller programs come in, other programs we find out about word of mouth. There are projects that have left us, smaller ones that have gone away. As many of you know, Community Concepts in Central Maine had to close their doors for transportation. So things are always moving. And for that reason, we're going to make the list available online. The deadline for all of this is March 31st. So we will have a online list of all the volunteer transportation programs that we know of on that list online by the end of March. And someone will be taking care of keeping that up to date. What we did with that list is we did a survey of all the people whose information we had. And we also followed up with interviews asking people many questions, their program's history, how their program ran, if they'd be willing to share materials, how many volunteers do they have, is there a cost for their service, how people can access their service, all kinds of information. So what that list will look like is online a drop-down menu. So if you go to your town to find transportation, it will link you to what's available in your town. And then from there, you can find out how to get to those people that are providing the transportation, what the cost might be, how much information they need from you to set up a ride, those kinds of things. So it will be an interactive website. The manual that we're working on will have all kinds of information that many of you have had questions about already. Zoe shared with me some of the questions that you guys had before this meeting today on what interested you about volunteer transportation. There will in the how-to manual be answers to many of those questions. It will start with a flow chart on how to get a program going if you don't have one yet. It will go on to how to establish partnerships, who needs to be involved, how to recruit drivers and retain drivers, screen drivers, train drivers, how to recruit riders, all kinds of forms to use that are related to all of those things. Many of these things originated way back with Joe Cooper, who then shared them with Neighbors Driving Neighbors, where I worked, and their current directors on here today. I saw Joe Austin was on here. And then many people have used those and refined them. And so many forms and sample documents will be available through this how-to manual, which will be on the same website as the directory. Other things in the manual will include options for insurance, if you want insurance for your volunteer drivers. It will include options for data collection software. What else? Maybe some information about having a board of directors, having a volunteer transportation program coordinator. All kinds of things are being put together now in this how-to manual so that ideally will answer all of your questions in terms of what what's needed to have a volunteer transportation program. I keep using the term volunteer transportation program because that's how we started out. That was our goal, was to have all the volunteer transportation programs. We found out through our search that they all look really different. Some are very, very simple. For example, some don't do background checks in these small towns. They say, well, we know everybody. Why would we do a background check on somebody? Others have a very extensive background check that they use. Some pay for them through the state. Others have their local police department do the background checks for them, which include a criminal and driving record check. Other programs do things really differently, and many are, not many, but we've found that there are many transportation programs in Maine of all different sizes, and some are not volunteer transportation programs. But one of the cities contacted me or was on a Zoom call with me and later contacted me and said, you know, I don't want somebody to click on South Portland and find that because ours isn't volunteer based, that they can't get a ride if they live in South Portland. So we're really wanting to add as many transportation programs in Maine as we can, so that people can have access to anything that they need. As you can tell from Joe's and my associations, we work with organizations that help people that are aging. This is, we don't want to just have senior transportation programs on our list. So it's becoming very broad, which is, I think, is a good thing. And that the people looking for rides can be the folks that determine where they go beyond the list. We want to have questions now or after Joe's piece?
Yeah, let's go to Joe and then we can do questions and discussions all at once. And if you have questions on your mind right now and you don't want to lose them, feel free to go ahead and throw them into the chat. Thank you, Mary Beth. Oh, Joe, you're muted.
There, finally. Whoops, I got myself messed up. Let me do this from the beginning. Start. Okay, so hello. I always am so nervous about the screen share thing. So you made me very nervous, Mary Beth. I am so excited to be able to do this. It's so gratifying for someone who has been in volunteer transportation for a long time. And there are people on this call that have been in it longer than me, to have this upsurge in interest in this approach. I really feel these local efforts will increase access. So this project that I'm working on is part of, let me just get some out of my way. The project for Maine Council on Aging on Transportation Equity. All right, let me get the screen to move on. And so the objectives of this project are a little broader, but as Mary Beth said, we have a lot of commonalities, especially at this part. And I was so thankful when Mary Beth contacted me with asking whether we could potentially collaborate. I am all about collaboration because you can always get more done, and especially when you have limited capacity. And it turned out to be really helpful. Both Mary Beth and course, blanking out, are such professionals and really helped a lot with the interviewing. It's still, well, as Mary Beth said, will be an ongoing process. The scope of this project is really looking at starting with volunteer transportation programs, trying to increase awareness of the programs, connecting programs together, and support for volunteer programs and volunteer drivers. That's what really, of course, excited me about the project, having run a program for so many years. And when I started, there was people looked at you in a very puzzled way when you talked about transportation. Are you going to have a bus system? They just didn't understand it at all. So it's exciting for me to see how much has happened around the state since then. And to increase then information sharing, trying to get volunteer programs to talk and local public transit providers talking to one another, sharing information, potentially doing more together. And then also including municipalities and community volunteers, this whole effort that's happening that Mary Beth has been talking about with the age-friendly efforts that are really centered very on municipality by municipality. And Go Maine, which is has been a commuter kind of software, is really increasing its scope and hopefully will be a great resource to also find information. Come on. Oh, let's see if I make this happen here. There we go. So as a volunteer transportation person, I'm really focused on volunteers and really successful programs around, and this was certainly true with the inventory that we've done, really provide certain things. There's certain best practices that seem to be common. Now, this isn't true for all, but most provide some level of training. Often it's an orientation to the program, but many will offer more than that. And they will offer ongoing training as different topics and issues come up, particularly when you're working with a population that may have need for mobility assistance and or have living with other disabilities, vision issues, hearing, memory loss. These are all things that really do to keep everyone safe, require a lot of training. Liability insurance through organizations, many offer that, and or beyond the auto insurance that is a volunteer. Usually it's the first recourse. It certainly was when we started and we had very limited resources. Background checks, and I would say even with this very small, as Mary Beth said, there are many that are very small, very rural. Some of them don't feel the need for or don't have the resources to conduct background checks. But I would say the majority of the people that are programs that we interviewed do some kind, even if it's just through their local police department. Having some form of clear communication about scheduling and trips is essential, but many don't need to invest in an expensive programming software, but others, there are some great ones available. I'll talk about that going on, but something that makes, so you don't have your riders feeling confused, uncertain about a ride, and that the volunteers are recognized for their service with some kind of a thank you. Whoops, I went back forward, sorry. And the volunteer profile, it's so varied program by program. I would say most, and it was true of Friends in Action, I think it's true of most, but not all. It really varies, are over the age of 60. We had a real variety of volunteers, and I early on thought, wow, if somebody's going to work, maybe they would be willing to give a ride and that. So, the ages really vary. And it also depends on what the program is doing. If they're providing rides for particular purposes, to cancer treatment, or to maybe they're going to other types of, a veteran, those can really inspire those people to want to help that population. And those drivers often are of all kinds of ages. The volunteers usually can stipulate when and how often they're available to drive. And that is true through, and as Mary Beth said, how you define a volunteer, we're focusing on volunteers that basically are real true volunteers. They're doing it. They may get some expenses reimbursed, but they're not getting reimbursed for mileage. Usually not, some do reimburse for mileage. But they, even for programs like the transit agencies that have volunteers within their agency to do more individual rides, those volunteers still can say, I'm only available on this day of the week. I only want to go this far. Most stay with the program that they're involved with for a long time. Many of the programs are very new, but many have stayed for more than 5 years. Some, it's more than 20. Most don't receive any pay or reimbursement, but some do, and most use their own auto insurance. And the motivation for volunteers, I think, is really key, because everyone is concerned about volunteer recruitment. And giving meaning and purpose to your life is really, that's so important for all of us, no matter what you're doing. But that is what really will keep people involved. They really believe in the mission. They develop relationships and the really good programs. I talked to one of the transit agencies. I was so impressed with the way that they interact with their volunteers, and they had a lot of volunteers, and it was, I think, because of the coordinator who really made a point to check in with them. They could come in and talk. That's really important, and feeling a part of it. Service to place is key, and I think your own town really concerned about improving the quality of life, making it possible for people to continue to live in a town is a huge motivator. And it's been exciting to see how the age-friendly efforts have really taken off. And personal experience, such as if you had a loved one who had cancer or your own parent struggled, that can be a huge motivator. So Mary Beth talked a little bit about some of the things we found out. I think this is as she said, there's probably now even more that we've discovered, but we've found over 35. The bigger programs, which weirdly enough includes Friends of Action, which is very strange to me, but many were started more than 20 years ago. But about a third of the ones we found were only just been started, and some only in the last year or so. About half, and it may be a little over half, are independent nonprofits. A lot of them are through their municipality and through the age-friendly effort, their grassroots approach, or in a few are even through a church. A couple of them are through churches or other faith-based organizations. Some are also programs underneath a nonprofit. They're a program of a nonprofit. And a lot, I would say almost all, but not all, focus on the needs of people over 60 pretty exclusively, but many will help people of all ages, and particularly people living with disabilities. And I will say here, one thing that's been really exciting about this project is learning about some of these new efforts around Maine, particularly focusing on immigrant communities, new Mainers, people who don't necessarily speak English. It's so exciting to hear about some of that for me. A huge majority of them really do conduct background checks, or at least reference checking. And And as I say, this is a great resource overall. You know, when you count up the number of volunteers, some only have 2 or 3, some have 50. They are overseeing over 1,000 volunteer drivers across the state. We're going to have the goal of this project. One of the goals is to have a resource list that will live on the Maine Council on Aging website. It's also going to be available through UMaine as on a trip planning, which you will be able to find. It's not quite there yet, but it will be. These are also some other resources that I think are really useful, depending on if you're trying to start something from scratch or you are already going and you just want to talk to others. One of the exciting things about this project is the networking. I think that's essential for programs. You know, you get into it and you have questions about how do you do this or what's the answer for even a, you know, something that you just can't know when you're first starting out. So the AARP effort is, they've got some tremendous resources. ITN Country, I see Catherine's here. And I just want to say that is almost like a package that you can, if you haven't got anything at all, could be a real great resource with technical support and as well as the scheduling software. That is something you could contact them to investigate if you're looking for resources. The National Volunteer Caregiving Network is one that may not be as well known, but it was what originally was part of the Faith in Action and Robert Wood Johnson effort. And when Robert Wood Johnson stepped away from Faith in Action, they gave grant money to continue the network, and it has grown beyond programs like Friends in Action that started through that effort. And that is a network that's national. There are programs of all, you're affiliated, it's a membership program, but it's got a tremendous library and toolkit, and for all kinds of different things, marketing, technical support. They have groups that you can connect with any day through email listservs. It's a great, tremendous resource. And it just so happens that I'm the state ambassador for Maine. And another one is the National Aging and Disabilities Transportation Center. They have tons of resources available nationwide that you can link with Easter Seals, which has a lot of great technical support for transportation. So I am going to out of that, and I will leave it at that to answer questions and whatever you would like.
Thank you so much, Joe and Mary Beth, and I will get their slides out as part of the follow-up, so you can click those links. What I'd love to do is open it up to discussion and questions. And I think Diane had maybe a question in the chat about liability insurances for drivers. And I know that's often one of the top questions folks have. So I don't know if Diane, if you wanted to come off mute and let us know what your specific question was, or if Joe and Mary Beth want to speak a bit to what options you see around insurance.
Sure. So my question was that I'm a member of Neighbor to Neighbor from Tenants Harbor, Maine, and we have never found anything we can afford for liability insurance for drivers. And in fact, we have board of directors insurance. But the liability insurance specifically for drivers, aside from what they would get perhaps from their insurance, their individual car insurance, has been prohibitive. And so when she mentioned it, I thought maybe she would have some insight or some help with that issue.
Well, I'll start, Mary Beth, because I know you've also got a resource. It's interesting you say you had directors and officers, because we did it the other way around, because we couldn't afford the directors and officers. And one of our board president was an attorney who said that we would be okay legally. And that was much more expensive than our liability, which even in my ending last year was around $500. So you might want to investigate that with an insurance agent a little bit. There's also volunteer insurance through SEMA, and that I believe AARP is going to be offering to age-friendly groups. But that also I found out that some groups they also offer a liability insurance. That might be worth investigating to see if that's more affordable.
So Diane, Joe mentioned SEMA. They have a volunteer driver's insurance, where, as Joe mentioned, the driver's personal insurance comes first. And then if there's anything over and above that, it goes to this volunteer insurance. And it's really inexpensive. It depends on the number of drivers you might have out on the road on any given day. And if you're a small program and only might have one or two, it's really an inexpensive program. So I think it's SEMA.com, and you can contact them for that information.
Thank you very much.
Also, as Joe mentioned, the AARP will be providing volunteer driver insurance to any age-friendly community that has a volunteer transportation program. So be in touch with Patricia. Patricia O, if you're age-friendly and an age-friendly community, and she can let you know more about that.
That brings up a question that I have, Mary Beth and Joe, which is if an organization wants support, or say someone is just at the very beginning trying to figure this out, do either of you have capacity through your current projects to kind of walk them through it or hold their hand as they're figuring it out? So, sometimes I think about, like, if I am calling up to get insurance, I may not even know what to ask. And so it sort of turns into a game of telephone where, I've had this personally with financial conversations where then I realize if I get somebody else to the table with me, that I was just misunderstanding something. So I'm just wondering about that, like hand holding, and if that's something we need, and we need more, we need more capacity, because obviously you both have the expertise. So, if you started getting calls from people to help them, is that something that you can do?
In my capacity, it is. So I put my email address in the chat box, and I'm able to help people. I'm really hoping that this manual, with everything in one place, will help alleviate some of the individual concerns that people have. But yeah. How about you, Joe?
Well, through this project, we're encouraging networking, and there is a tri-state learning collaborative that does have a volunteer transportation conversation every quarter, that is both with Maine volunteer programs and with New Hampshire and Vermont. And it's really, really useful. Outside of this project, I'm certainly available through the National Volunteer Caregiving Network. But I think having this listing of programs, within that listing, there's a lot of expertise. The one thing, there are varied approaches. I think the age-friendly approach is an excellent and really great way for grassroots people concerned about their own community to get started. But there's around the country, and even through some programs that have been going for some time, concern about best practices. So hopefully Mary Beth's manual will get people started on the right foot, that you're, really getting certain things in place right from the beginning. So, I'm definitely, it's a passion of mine. I can never say no when somebody asks me a question, but I think the resource list will be also a resource for asking questions as well.
Great. So I would just open it up to other questions that folks have, and you can just come right off mute and ask. Or comments.
Hi, Zoe. This is Terry Palmer. Let me start my video. Here we go. I have a quick question. We're running into an opportunity here in New Hampshire where we have one insurance provider for the whole state of New Hampshire. So what I'm hearing from our Medicaid broker is that we're losing some of our non-emergency medical transportation providers due to their insurance skyrocketing. Are you guys seeing the same opportunity in Maine, or do you have multiple insurance providers that can provide insurance for volunteer drivers for non-emergency medical transportation?
I think that it's pretty individual, program by program, and the volunteer, among volunteer programs. I think I know there's some transit providers on the call, and like Tom Rainauer probably can answer that in a flash. Tom, are you still here? Yeah.
I'm here. Yeah. Sorry to squeeze in some lunch. So my camera's off. Yeah. So we're a little different because we're part of a larger community action agency. So we do have additional insurance on that helps the volunteer drivers in addition to their own insurance. So it'll kick in similar to what I think Mary Beth was talking about, perhaps, or somebody was before. So that's kind of how it works for us. I do know that's at least our broker has kind of shied away from directly paying their volunteers. So I don't know whether they just decided to alleviate that risk by not having volunteers being reimbursed directly by them instead of through a separate entity. But at least we do have, and I would guess that people like RTP as well have additional insurance that covers the over and above the regular insurance policy by the driver. I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's kind of how it works here.
Terry, when I started, which was in the early 2000s, it was really up to us to find our own insurance, and it was hard because it was all you had to do was say volunteer driver, and they freaked out. So I think now we don't have one single provider in Maine, as far as I'm aware, however. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine.
This is my Halloween hand. It works better
Oh.
than my grandchildren love it. So I want to say that, Joe, I thought your presentation was wonderful, and there wasn't one single thing that you said that I didn't agree with completely, and have found very similar realities and truths in the work that we do. So for those of you who don't know me or haven't met me, I started the volunteer service in Portland 28 years ago. And we've now done about 350,000 rides over time. We use both paid and volunteer drivers. And we also started ITAN America, which is an organization that supports volunteer services. We were interviewed by Barb Wentworth for the inventory. And when we were so excited about what she was doing, and she got so excited about what we do, she suggested that we contact the Maine Community Foundation And we did, and we got a grant to introduce the volunteer services in the inventory in Maine to the ITN country support system that we have. So we will be reaching out to all of you to let you know what we have and see if it is helpful to you. And I can tell you right now, we have a free online support system that if anybody here is interested in looking at, just send me your email and I'll get you introduced to that. But the other thing I wanted to mention is something related but different. And it is a new project that we are starting. It's a multi-year project and it's called America's Volunteer Driver Center. And I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's for all nonprofit volunteer services in the United States. It's for everybody. And Senator Collins helped us get the funding for this, but I'm sure you all know how incredibly hard it is to recruit volunteers now since COVID and how hard it is altogether to do. And so we made the case that we need something that is similar to what the Red Cross does for blood donation. There needs to be a national approach so that every hardworking, resource-starved local volunteer service isn't trying to invent volunteer recruitment on their own, so that there could be a supported national effort. So that project is just starting now, and we're going to do an environmental scan of all, how do I want to say this? It's a public information campaign, similar to, let's say, Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk, or Volunteer to Donate Blood, or Don't Take Drugs. It's a public health campaign, and it's supported by the Federal Transit Administration and the CDC. It's going to put together messages for people across the country to inspire them to volunteer to drive. And it is to benefit every volunteer organization in the country that needs drivers. It's not just for ITN country or just for ITN, it's for everybody. So we're putting together what we call a leadership roundtable, which will have representation from government, from philanthropy, and from business and industry, healthcare providers, insurance companies, and so forth, and bring all these big guys to the table to help them understand how much need is out there and how much it's in their interest to help support volunteer services, because the country needs them. There's just too much transportation starvation going on out there. But we're also putting together an advisory panel that has representatives, people like Joe Cooper, who know their stuff and want to advise how volunteer recruitment should help. So we'll be reaching out to you to see about participation in that. That effort is just starting now, and we'll keep Zoe informed. Zoe will keep you all informed, and we'll keep the folks at UMaine, Mary Beth, Joe Cooper, everybody, so you know what we're doing and can have an opportunity for input into that. I think I've been in this field now for 30 years. It may be the most important thing we're doing, because that's the biggest unmet need there, that people to do the driving. So I'll stop talking now. My email's in there if you want to reach out to me, but we'll be reaching out to you too for follow-up with what we're doing. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, and Catherine let me know about that project today. So congratulations. That's really exciting. And we'll definitely share more information and look at how we can help engage folks with that. We do have time for a couple, maybe one last question. I don't know. Katie, I see what you put in the chat. Did you want to say anything more about that, or is just commenting on that being like the type of challenge you see with liability?
Just the type of comment. Yeah, just saying that was one thing that had come up, and just something that simple, but my understanding, it was pretty painful and the person needed to seek additional medical attention because of it, which was totally innocent on each end. But now the driver feels bad, but the family's upset because they felt as though the family or the driver should have been trained or wasn't trained properly. So, and these types of things, until it goes to court or until something happens, that's where everything's okay. You know, so
I think the good risk management is how you can get ahead of those kinds of situations. So training is part of that, but you can't train for every eventuality. So what happened in my program one time was something similar. It was almost where a volunteer was dropping someone off who was extremely disabled, having had a stroke, and sometimes would get stuck. She couldn't make her feet move. So he got into the habit of taking her to physical therapy would park in the handicapped spot, but then get a wheelchair and take her in. One day when he arrived, there was an ambulance there, and he parked in his usual place. And I got a call from the scheduler who was very, very upset that our volunteer had blocked the ambulance. Somebody was having a cardiac event. Well, I immediately was like, oh my God. Well, it turned out it didn't happen, but then it got me thinking about what if. And it was more not the driving itself, but it's that kind of thing, the going to and from because not all, but many programs are door through door. They're taking people from the vehicle into the appointment or from the home or back into the home, and things that could happen, falls and other things. And that the SEMA does also, besides the volunteer driver insurance, we actually got the volunteer insurance, which covers all other volunteer activity. So it's that kind of thing that you're describing. It's like, it protects the volunteer from, that kind of liability. That I never have had to test it, as I see has been mentioned in the chat, and we never had anything happen, believe it or not, in over 20 years. But people, you get to that what if, at some point there has to be trust that your person, that you're the rider, and their family and their caregivers have to trust. And same with the volunteer, that everyone is trying and is going to do their very best to keep everyone safe. If we are not careful, we won't do anything. And so it's definitely a challenging thing to face into, but the more training you can come up with. I had oxygen providers come and do trainings with our volunteers about how to transport someone who needed oxygen. So, I mean, those are things that sometimes you can get ahead of. But if you don't have the capacity for it, you have to try to, the insurance is a really good approach.
Well, thank you, Joe. We're just about out of time. Thank you to all of you for being here today. Thank you to Mary Beth and Joe for their presentation. And I will be sending out a link to the recording and the slides from today. And feel free to follow up if you have additional questions. I think we definitely want to keep the conversation going. So thank you all. And I hope you stay warm and dry with the weather we have coming. Take care.